Hi, it's me, Chris Harder, and welcome back to Showboys, the podcast bringing you a glittery, gritty, full frontal glimpse into the world of boylesque. What is boylesque? We're going to find out. Now, not to beat a dead unicorn, but season 1 of Showboys is almost officially wrapped. So if you have any burning or perhaps freezing questions about boylesque or even about me, you can email them to showboyspod@gmail.com. Usually I hate talking about myself, but if you happen to ask me a question about me, well, I live to serve. And don't worry, season 2 of Showboys will be back after a brief respite and chock full of even more fascinating interviews, intriguing historical narratives, and knee-slapping, butthole-tingling humor. Sorry, Mom. And speaking of buttholes, I have a very special guest today. This person is a performance powerhouse, a proprietor of personalities, a loquacious leviathan, and a well-traveled titan of striptease. He's a joker, a smoker, and a midnight troller of any audience member foolish enough to issue him a heckle. Sometimes you can see him as a dapper yet slightly damp snow person, or as a dastardly devious sweetbread. Other times he's the best British export since Lydia Thompson and the Blondes. And I think about as old as them too. Haha. Long story short, he's lived 1,000 lives and divorced 1,000 more. Please welcome to the Showboys stage, Bradford Scobie.
Hooray, Bradford Scobie. Oh, am I supposed to clap for myself?
I think, you know what? I'm actually, maybe I'll take this out in post. I'm going to start adding an audience applause sound effect. Because each episode I'm growing, you know?
Oh, yes. Are you?
You got to show the growth.
Yes.
I mean, I've shown certain kinds of growth, but I'm going to show a different kind of growth on this podcast.
Yes.
So, yes.
Yeah.
How are you doing today, Bradford?
I am not shrinking from your growth.
Okay.
I'm lovely. Thanks for asking. I just mowed the lawn, so I'm feeling unusually butch. And, yeah. Thank you for that lovely eulogy. I couldn't help but notice that you pointed out that I'm old, you rotten little shit, you whippersnapper. I do have a question for you.
Okay.
Now, when you started in this business, did you have body hair?
Well, technically, yes. But when I first started in burlesque, I was also go-go dancing a lot. And that's really how I got into burlesque, was through go-go dancing and meeting all these burlesque performers like world famous Bob. And long story short, all the boys used to shave their body hair. Like the mid-aughts, everyone was shaving their body hair. In fact, I distinctly remember working at G Lounge, which is now no longer there in Chelsea. I think it's Rebar. And this guy got on top of the bar. I was like, oh, hey, how you doing? Welcome. And all of a sudden I was like, oh no, he's bleeding, because he had just shaved his chest like dry with a beak razor and was like, spotting.
I only asked because the first time I met you, which was about 500 years ago.
Yes.
Not exactly jailbait yourself, I'm just saying.
What are you talking about?
I seem to recall you having no body hair. And then now you are more traditional in your presentation of your natural hair.
Yeah, I would say about well, it's my brand, I think, is basically a split between really gay faggy costumes and body hair. That's me.
I see. Lovely. Yeah. Well, body hair does appeal to a certain gay.
Are you that gay? Do you like body hair?
I like it, but not on myself.
Okay.
I am freshly shorn for this interview.
And I see wearing a full bodysuit, basically.
Always. I always fuck in full tuxedo.
Yes. Woof. All right, we're already getting into it. Well, enough about me, but and my body hair and your lack of body hair, because I want to talk about your career, Bradford, and you really do have an incredible career in burlesque. Multiple. You do. I know, right? I'm just gonna fluff you this entire hour.
All right, thank you.
How did you enter into burlesque, though? What was take us back to the beginning?
Well, It was pre-mid-aughts. That's how fucking long ago it was. It was prehistoric. It was like 1999 or something disturbing like that. And yes, it was the New York City was Giuliani's town, and he was cleaning this shithole up, and he was Disneyfying Times Square, and this was the last gasp of good old-fashioned 1970s Times Square filth. And there was this marvelous venue called Show World, I believe.
Yes.
And it was a clown themed strip club with automated clowns greeting you in the lobby. And basically, Giuliani had this batshit crazy rule where a strip club had to have a certain percentage of high art or something nutty like that.
Right.
And so, so that was our show. And Kate Valentine, aka the legendary Miss Astrid, had a show called the Vava Voom Room, and this was one of the venues in which she held this show. And I had never done any sort of burlesque. I'd done like sketch comedy and this kind of thing. And I was sort of tinkering with the ukulele. And she asked if I wanted to be in her show. So I was like, well, geez, all I can do is I can write these dirty little comedy songs, but I don't know how to, I don't want to just show up in a Hawaiian shirt. It's just so boring. I need a gimmick. And I was like, what do the other people do? She goes, well, they're strippers. I was like, yeah, that's not happening. She's like, well, people juggle. I'm like, well, I'm talent free. I can't do that. She goes, and there's clowns. I was like, clowns, that's easy. Slap on some face paint, throw on a costume, clown, which I think probably to most classically trained clowns is a very offensive way of looking at clowndom. I'm sure there's some very serious Russian clown that would like to karate chop me in the throat right now, but that was how I saw it. And so I came up with Ukulele Louie, which was my sad clown character. He dressed in a sort of there's a traditional sort of that sad clown that God, I can't think of the guy's name, but he had like a 5 o'clock shadow and sort of the sad hobo clown. But he had sort of a luau look to him as well. He had a grass skirt and stuff like this. And he sang about death and divorce and stuff like this.
Uh-huh.
So that was the first character I ever did in a burlesque show. And then I did attempt at hosting as him. And that was a miserable bomb because he was only sad. And you cannot host a show as one note, and that of all the notes is the worst note you could possibly host a show. So every time I stepped on stage, the whole energy would just go right down the tubes. So yeah, he didn't host for long, but as an act, he did all right.
So after Ukulele Louie, after the untimely demise of Ukulele Louie's hosting career, what was the next person that you created?
I had a character, Bratwurst, who was basically dressed like Little Lord Fauntleroy, the sort of classic, Victorian rich kid with the ruffles and the knee socks and the sailor collar and all that. But he had like a Jerry Lewis kind of a voice, but astronomical bomb. People hated Bratwurst. That was short-lived as well.
Okay. So here's the thing, because I find it interesting that you said when you were younger that you were maybe compelled to and repelled by the stage. I felt the same way when I was first moved to New York to be an actor. I loved theater and I loved the idea of being on stage, but then once I always felt awkward, or I felt like I wasn't myself, or I don't know. At a certain point, I just realized I was auditioning for these roles that I wasn't even interested in. All that to say, so when did it finally click for you, in whether it was in burlesque or on stage? What was kind of the aha moment for you?
That was one night I was getting ready to go and host a show, which was just at that point a form of self-abuse. I don't know why I kept at it. And I was sitting there looking at my fucking bratwurst costume, and I was like, oh god, I can't bear it, don't make me wear that thing tonight. And I had all this pre-scripted stuff that was just not working. I would go out there and do all these pre-planned jokes that were on paper, technically they were jokes, but I would go out there and deliver them, and people would be like, no, not having it. And I had no control over the audience, and I was and they can, they could smell blood, and it was what happened was I had seen Scotty the Blue Bunny perform, and he had nothing scripted. He just pulled a bunch of silly nonsense out of his backside, and everyone was dying. Everyone loved him, and he was lording control over the audience. So I was like, why is it I have all this pre-planned, rehearsed, scripted stuff, and he pulls a bunch of nonsense out of his ass? And so I was like, okay, fuck it. So I had this costume. It was a Dr. Donut costume that I had from an old sketch comedy group. And basically Dr. Donut was a donut themed supervillain, much like you would see in the Batman TV show of the 60s. And so it's lycra fat suit, a giant donut on my head. I put on all this makeup, and I said, screw it. I'm just going to get drunk, and I'm going to go out there, and I'm just going to pull a bunch of nonsense out of my ass. And Dr. Donut in the sketch had been British, right? And just disgusting. So I just went out there, and I just winged it. It was like, that was the aha moment, because not to tug my own dick, but I killed, and I was like, oh my God, I just need to, my real focus shouldn't be the material. It should be the experience and the moment of working this crowd. And at the time, I was so scared of the crowd that I needed that insane costume and makeup and cocktails to get the bravery going. But then as years went on, I was like, I don't need to drink anymore. I can do this sober. I weaned myself off the booze. I do like a cocktail here and there, but I can do, at this point I was like, all right, stop self-medicating. And then I did strip away the donut costume and all that makeup, and eventually came up with Sir Richard Castle, who's also British, so he sort of derives from Dr. Donut.
Do you still get, maybe not stage fright, but do you still have nerves before a show?
At the Slipper Room where I work normally, never. It's just a day at the office. I feel nothing. I just, some people prepare, some people are like in character before they go on stage. I don't. I'm just like, hey, how you doing? And then I step on stage, hurrah, just instantaneously. I've done it 8 billion times. So that it is sort of like autopilot. If shit starts to go down during a show, I might go backstage and be like, oh my God, I'm losing control. I feel nervous. But when I feel nervous about the behavior of an audience member at Slipper Room, I get pissed off. I'm like, nope, this is not fucking happening. This is my house, this kind of an attitude. So then I go in at, guns a-blazing and get that shit under control. If I'm doing a show, like if I'm being like flown out to a burlesque festival, I will get a little nervous. I do find that once I'm in the venue and meeting the people, then I start to feel a lot better.
Sure.
When it's all up in my head, I might get a little weirded out. But once I'm there and I see where I, get my bearings, that does make me feel a lot better. And I do get a little nervous, I guess, but not that like I'm going to throw up in my mouth nervous that I used to get back in my Dr. Donut days.
Back in the Dr. Donut days. That makes sense. I also think, and I don't know what you think about this, but I think hosting at the Slipper Room is very specific in a way. Like it's pretty much a regular show format, like 3 to 4 performers, 2 sets, 1 host. But, the shows last about 2 hours. And so as hosts, we're really expected to have some kind of material, or at least to be able to fill time in a way that, ideally is pleasurable, especially for the audience. So does that ever, because I feel like sometimes when I go host other shows, that's something that takes me a moment to like readjust to.
Oh, being less filler.
Being less filler.
Yeah, well, that's a nice problem to have,
That's
I I do find that I do feel like New York is a really great training ground. I'll in New York you can just be like fucking like slicing your arteries open and spilling your guts onto the stage, and people just will sit there and stare at you blinking. So you just have to keep doing something to pull something out of them. I mean, that's not always true, but there have been audiences where I'm like, what is up with these fucking people, you know? And then when you take that to a lovely town like Baltimore, and you're doing the same, like you have been spilling your guts out to get a reaction out of people in New York. When you go to Baltimore, they're like, oh my God, this is fantastic, you know? So it's a great place to train, you know, and then you take it to other towns and it's like, yeah, I got all this other shit. If you need me to do stuff, I'm here for you. But hey, if you just want me to go up and say a joke and introduce them and get off, pardon, you know, insert dirty joke here, then I'm happy to do that too. You know what I mean? If they don't need me to fill, I will cheerfully do less work, you know. But
Yeah.
it's nice having all of that in your back pocket in your little bag of tricks, you know.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, my note is usually Chris, so we're kind of running behind. So you can just announce people now.
That's I love that. That's
Yeah,
great news.
I know, same. So on that note, because I do want to talk about your tenure as Richard Castle, but do you have from your vast array of experiences on stage, what are some hosting tips or do's or don'ts, or what are some principles that you try to keep in mind for shows for yourself?
Well, I do have some that I feel are universal, and then I have others that are my personal rules for myself, just because I think that hosting is a very strange art, and what works for one person doesn't for another. It's not, I don't know how people do teach classes, but it's so amorphous, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, to the rules. Golden rule number one is don't fuck up the names of the performers. You know, that's your one job. And that makes me bananas when people do that. I think it's frankly really disrespectful of the performer. And a lot of times people are like, it's okay. It's okay. I'm like, no, it's not okay. I fucked up. And I will do anything to not fuck up a name, even if it means like, ladies and gentlemen, here she is now, and then I just blank and on the pronunciation maybe.
Sure.
And so I will be like, one moment, and then I poke my head backstage. I'm like, how do you say my name? And it's really awkward and dumb, but it's, you know, you make a bit out of it, and then you come back and you say their name properly, just because I think that's very important. If you need to write it down, write it down. Just don't screw up their name. That's, as a host, that's the main thing. I do also have a pointer, which is a lot of times there'll be that one asshole in the audience who is scowling no matter what you do. And it's very natural for a host to want to zoom in on that person and
Mm-hmm.
get sucked into that vortex of negativity and try to win them over or try to combat with them or somehow make, and my advice is ignore that person and focus on the people that love you. And if you have a whole audience that fucking hates you, but there's one person laughing, just play to them. Just try, you know, even though you're fight the resistance to be like, fuck all y'all, which God knows I say that practically nightly, but so I really should take my own advice. But that's a big one for me. I also, another one is don't insult the performers.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You know, they're already in a very a vulnerable position. They're laying it all out. They're flashing their undercarriage or whatever. So I think that and people will think, oh, you know, they're degrading themselves. You know, I can treat them like garbage. So I think it's very important to trump them up and command respect for them. I do make some off-color jokes, but I only make those about my friends, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I would never do that about someone I've never met before. I have other tricks for keeping the audience in check, because as you know, a lot of our job is audience control because it gets very ruckus. We've got bachelorette parties from New Jersey, God love them, but they get a little wacky, and birthday parties and drinking and people who are new to New York and did their first bump of cocaine, and it's just all very exciting, and they won't shut the fuck up. And so you really do have to lord over the audience. So I do find crowd work is a good way to keep people terrified. If you're chatting with people, it puts the audience on edge and makes them feel exposed and unsafe in a good way. And that's a good way to keep control. Also, I always keep a flashlight in arm's reach.
That's right.
Yes. So if someone is a real pain in the ass, I shine it on them, and it always has fresh batteries. I'm like, may I help you? And they're like, oh, so that's actually a very effective way to keep people in check. Then if someone is really getting involved and they won't shut the fuck up and they keep heckling and talking and wanting to get involved, another thing I will do is I resort to saying to them, well, you're clearly starved for attention, and this is a burlesque show. I think you need to come up here and strip. And they're like, and then the audience is like, yeah, strip, get up there, strip. And then one of two things happens. They come up, they strip, and that breaks the spell. A lot of the times they do that. They have this explosion of attention, and then they're tired. They're tapped out.
Right.
Or they come up and just like, I'll do it. And then they start like sexy dancing and nothing comes off. And they sexy dance longer and nothing comes off. I'm like, you're not stripping, And so then they feel like an asshole and they leave. Or they refuse to come up on strip and strip. That tends to break the spell as well, because then they realize that they aren't putting their money where their big fat fucking mouth is. Side note, I always get consent. I lay it on super thick.
Well, so how do you do that?
Well, if someone is stripping, and they're like, I'll be like, do you want to take your underwear off? Do you want to take your underwear off? This is, when an audience member is stripping,
right?
Obviously, this is a volunteer. And they'll be like, I don't know. And I'm like, yeah, you can. We'll pay the fine. Take off your underpants. Hey, everybody, you want them to take their underpants off? And they're like, hooray. But I always say to the audience member, this is consensual. Yes, you want to take your underpants off, right? Right? Yes. Right. Okay, great. And then I turn to the audience. You heard it from them. It's been confirmed. This is legally binding. And then the underpants come off, and there's no regrets, because people will they're drunk. They feel pressure. So I will have a moment with them eye to eye where I'm like, I need to make sure you're on board with this. And they will or they won't based on their own decision. I want them to feel supported, even in the middle of that batshit crazy moment, largely to cover my own ass.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to have all those things in place. And it is, you're balancing so much when you're up on stage, because like you were saying, you want to make sure that the performers feel good about how you are presenting them to the audience. You want to make sure the audience is paying attention and feels like they're part of the show. And then on top of that, there's usually at least always one person who thinks they're God's gift to the Lower East Side, and everyone's here for their birthday or their bachelorette party. I know we've talked about this before. I kind of love bachelorettes. I feel like my personal wheelhouse is like bachelorette parties, birthday girls, not always, but sometimes they actually can take more piss out of themselves than the host. It's like bachelors sometimes that I feel like suddenly, get all up in arms.
Oh, really? I agree with you. I love, but they get a bad rap, but I love bachelorette parties and or birthday parties or whatever.
Right.
I wonder if the reason, I have an okay time with bachelors. And I've gotten guys up there and I've had them strip, and some of these guys have even pulled out their willies. It's really I wonder if it's because I am presenting as quote unquote straight, and you are clearly not. You know what I
I have
mean?
no clue what you're talking about.
I know it's a stretch. Sir Richard Castle is always says he's heterosexual, which of
Mhm.
course is ridiculous because he flirts with women as well as men, and he talks blatantly about sex he's had with men and sex he
Right.
would have with men. So, but he's old school. He's like, well, that doesn't count. I'm straight. You know what I mean? So, but even in saying all that, and he has ex-wives and he's flirting with women, and I wonder if straight guys are more open to being sort of coaxed. Is that the word I'm looking for?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Then, like, maybe with you being a sparkly, twinkly fairy,
A
they
hairy fairy.
yeah, maybe it's a little too much for them. I don't know. I don't know.
Maybe. Maybe. Straight guys, if you're listening to the podcast right now, write in. Let me know. Why am I so intimidating for you?
By the way, you should call this show gays because I don't think you've had a single heterosexual.
Um,
Um,
no, I think I have. I think there's
oh yeah, well, yeah, the drag king so far is the only heterosexual. No, was there?
well,
I mean, I've listened to every episode, of course.
uh-huh.
Love the
Yeah,
show, friend of the pod.
friend of the pod. I guess I don't know what Xavier's sexuality. I mean, I think they're definitely queer. I mean, everyone's queer,
I
but
know.
I feel like burlesque tends to attract a lot of queer misfits, which I
Mm-hmm.
say with love.
Yeah.
Maybe season two, I'll only have straight performers on.
Yeah, and it'll be 2
I was gonna say it's
episodes.
gonna be a very short season.
Yes.
One thing I was thinking about when I was prepping these questions, and I think this happened during a Wiggle Room where you were
Mm-hmm.
hosting as Sir Richard Castle. I've never actually seen you host as anyone but Sir Richard Castle.
Yeah.
So I don't, oh, well, no, I've seen Moisty the Snowman. Anyway, we were middle of the show, and there was this patron who was sitting in the very front row, right center, and she kept harassing you, the performers. She was interrupting the show, and you tried multiple ways of dealing with her. And this was going, this was from the beginning of the show well into the second set, and then you finally stopped the show and said that we wouldn't continue until she left. And I just want to add that the audience was completely on your side by that point. You've already kind of talked about it, but do you have like the steps for dealing with rowdy patrons, or if you remember this moment, what were you thinking in that moment?
Well, I mean, I have things I try.
Hmm.
And if, I have the flashlight, I have getting them up to strip or not strip. I just engage with them and try to tear them a new one. I ask their friends to, calm them down. And if nothing is working, there have been a couple times like that time you're mentioning where you just have to clean the clock. You just
Right.
have to gut the whole thing and fix it from there. And it's absolutely terrifying for everybody involved. So what I did that night was I realized there was no stopping her. She was just yelling negatively over the whole fucking show. She was front and center. So I did. I said, it's time for you to go. And I'm not going to continue this show until you're gone. And so I got a chair and a drink, and I sat on stage and just stared at her and sipped my drink, and in silence, no
Yeah.
music, nothing. And the audience was like, oh my God, this is not happening. This isn't funny anymore. He's not making jokes. It was just such agony. And then eventually the audience starts to grumble, and she's like, got her arms crossed. She's not going anywhere. And then eventually the audience took over and they started saying, get out, get out. And I was looking at her silently, but my face was like, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so she eventually got up, and I was stunned. I was like, she's going to throw her drink in my face. She stood up, like white knuckling a full martini, probably her 30th. And I was like, that thing's going in my face. But it didn't. And she leans in, she goes, you're pathetic. And then I blew her a kiss, and then she walked away. and everyone cheered. And then, so it really sucked for everybody. And I was like, I don't know where this is going.
Sure.
It was a risk, but it paid off. And then in the end, me and the audience had this bonding experience. We ended up having a fabulous night. Yeah, there have been times where I remember somebody was throwing limes from their drinks at me. Like
really?
they kept from the balcony, kept lobbing garbage at me like a fucking vaudeville show. So and that's when I was like, you know what, I can put up with a lot of abuse, but being pelted with garbage while I'm performing, that's a little too demeaning even for burlesque. So I got real actually I got real and I literally said, if and I couldn't figure out who it was. They're doing it from the dark. I tried to get their friends to out them. I was not able to pinpoint who was doing it. So I was like, okay, well, I can't kick them out. So I just need to torture the whole room right now. And I was like, if this person throws one more piece of fucking fruit at me, this show is over. I was like, it's over. I'm not performing. The performers aren't performing. They'll still get paid. I was like, and I literally said, don't make me drop the fake accent. I was just like, really, really. And people were like, damn, you could hear a pin drop. I felt like a pissed off substitute teacher. And the class was just like, oh, we've gone too far. And then I snapped out of it. I was like, let's continue with the show, because it's this weird abusive back and forth, but that worked out in the end. They stopped. I would have shut that show down. I was like, I'll deal with James Habacker later. I'm sure he would take my side. James Habacker is the
owner,
owner and proprietor of the Slipper Room. And I'm sure he would have supported me. So I was like, yeah, this is not happening. And it stopped. But when you do that stuff, you're like, where is this going to go? But you can't continue.
Yeah, it's such a fine line. And I do think that is maybe that is not as common, right? Like you may have like a rowdy bachelorette, or you may have like some bro from Connecticut, but usually like the show, usually even those people want to have a good time and will eventually get it, right?
They're usually lovely.
Yeah. Well, those sound like some of the more traumatic times on stage. What have been some of the more exciting, joyful, if I dare say, moments on stage for you?
Well, there was the time I was bum rushed by an angry, drunk bachelorette. I can't remember what I said to piss her off, but she was on stage pursuing me physically. And so luckily I had home court advantage. So I disappeared behind the curtain. She chased me behind the curtain. I came out from the curtain. It was like this ookie kooky chase scene happening on the stage. And the DJ Taro, the sound man at Slipper, started playing the Benny Hill chase music. That was fucking hysterical. And eventually her friends intervened and led her off the stage. That was pretty funny. A very sweet moment was I brought a woman on stage and she had a boy. I was like, oh, you have your boyfriend here? Yeah. I was like, are you married? No. Would you like to be married? Yeah. Would he like to be married? Yeah. And so then her boyfriend came on stage and he proposed, and I gave him a temporary ring because I always keep these cheap Party City wedding rings on hand, because you never know. Yeah, you never know when you want to propose to somebody. There's certain things I always keep. I always keep a dollar bill in my breast pocket too, because you never know when you're going to have to feed that in somebody's whatever. When I bring up someone on stage to strip, it's always a funny bit to put a dollar in my teeth and spit it into their undergarments. But so I always keep a wedding ring and a dollar bill on me at all times. So he legit proposed to her, and I even said to him, this is not legally binding. This is all for theatrics. Don't panic. Just do it. Let's get through this. He goes, no, this is for real. And he told me after the show, thank you. He said he'd been procrastinating for a year. He said it took that moment to get the balls to do it. And I was very proud of that. There was also the time there was a guy on stage and he had cocaine on him. We were smoking a cigarette on stage because I as you know, I do this bit where I smoke on stage and I bring a smoker on stage and we smoke together on stage because that's the only way you can smoke indoors if it's art. And I had this guy on stage and he's smoking and drinking, and then he says, and I'm like, oh, you're multitasking, I see. And then he mentions that he likes cocaine, and he had some, and he palms one of those little tiny plastic sandwich bags of cocaine. He's like, man, I got some. I was like, well, do you want to do a bump now on stage? And he's like, yeah, I would. I mean, is that okay? I was like, oh, yes, it's legal now. These are all our friends. We won't tell anyone. There's no knocks in the audience. And everyone's like, hooray. And so he literally did a key bump like they did in the 80s, a key bump of cocaine. He offered me some, but I declined.
I think that's the best. Like thankfully there wasn't any fentanyl in his cocaine. I was like, and then we had to go search for Narcan at the bar and revive him on stage.
Yeah, the slipper room defibrillator. But there were some bad times. One time this old woman came on stage, and I do mean old. I mean, if I'm calling her old, she was pretty fucking old. And I was sort of flirting with her because I love to flirt with older women.
Yes.
Sir Richard Castle is always flirting with the older women. He flirts with the younger women too, but he tends to hone in on people's mothers and stuff like this. And this woman came on stage, and I'd been flirting with her, and I think the border between reality and fantasy had been blurred, because before I knew it, she had grabbed my face and was shoving her old tongue down my throat.
Wow.
And so then, like a year later, she reappeared. And she starts coming up the stage like, remember me? Remember me? And so I said, uh-huh. And I shimmied up the stage. I literally like scaled the wall to get away from her. And she was confused. She was mystified by my repulsion. In her mind, we had a lovely romantic makeout.
I was just thinking, one time Albert Cadabra was doing his striptease on stage, and for a lot of his, actually, he ends fully nude. And I think he, like, I don't know, maybe he was go-go dancing or something and he went full nude, but this woman came up and tipped him and then, like, put his dick in her mouth. And I was like, oh my God, this is...
Good Lord.
This is not the venue. Not the venue.
Well, it is the venue.
It is the venue, I guess.
You still need to get permission.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Consent.
Yeah, I mean, I do this bit where I'm like, someone will be like flirting with me, saying all this dirty stuff from on stage. And I'll be like, oh yeah, prove it. And I lie down on stage, on my back. I lie on the stage and I just wait. I just wait to see what they'll do. And a lot of times they'll be repelled, but a lot of times they'll come up on stage. And before I know it, they're like, sitting on my face or grinding, or it is male, female, straight, gay. It doesn't matter. Straight guys have come up and like done stuff. But I just lie there passively. And then I shut it down when I want to shut it down.
You're like the Marina Abramovic of burlesque. Do you know?
I don't know who that
Marina
is.
Abramovic. She's this world-renowned performance artist. She did The Artist is Present. She does a lot of work where she interacts with spectators, or one of her famous pieces in the 70s was where she stood still in a room and invited participants to do whatever they wanted to her, and one man pulled out a gun and held it to her head.
Oh my Lord.
I know. I love performing, but I draw the line at firearms.
Ditto.
You just wrapped up a 25-year tenure at the Slipper Room as Sir Richard Castle, hosting your weekly show, The Wiggle Room. How are you feeling about everything?
Well, I'm feeling offended that you think it was 25 years. I'm not that old.
Did you post 25 years, though, or was that someone else?
I posted 45 years as a joke.
Oh.
But it's a 10-year tenure. Basically, I think it was 11 years. I got it in my head it was 18, but then DJ Momotaro slapped me in the back of the head and said it was only 11. I'm sure he has he's been there with me from the beginning, so he has more of a realistic relationship with time and space than I do. So But yes, it was a long fucking time, no matter how you slice it. I had the Thursday show, The Wiggle Room. And so I had my last one a couple weeks ago, and everyone acted like I was retiring or dying, neither of which are true. The dying might be, to the best of my knowledge, it's not. And I'm still going to work at the Slipper Room on weekends, but the Thursday night was shut down. But it was a wonderful, magical night. It was batshit crazy. A guy pulled out his dick consensually, and that was the night where the guy did the bump of cocaine. It was just absolutely a bonkers, wonderful night. A gaggle of my beloved burlesque lady friends came as the bachelorettes, Bradford bachelorettes, and they all had ribbons with Sir Richard Castle on them, and it was just the cutest fucking thing. So yes, it was quite lovely, quite lovely.
I say this in all seriousness. You very much are a beloved performer, not just at the Slipper Room either. I was wondering though, because
I am. Anyway, go on.
And you're very confident as well. Where did the whole ex-wife, ex-brother-in-law bit come from? Because I feel like that's another thing. By the end of the show, audiences who haven't seen you perform, everyone loves jumping in and saying those lines with you. I think it's something really special that you do with the audience. Was that intentional, or was it a happy accident?
It sort of evolved. I found that I would try to mix it up with my intros with people, but I reached a point where I was like, screw it. I just need like a cookie cutter intro. I do think that's another host tip, which is to really sell the audience on the performer. I tend to get into full Barker mode. You know what I mean? Even if I've been sort of droning on with an intimate anecdote or something, I will just snap into Barker mode when it's time to bring out the performer. So every single time I say, ladies and gentlemen, here she is now, the lovely, the talented, my ex-wife, Lollipop, or whoever.
Right.
If it's a male, I will say, ladies and gentlemen, here he is now, the lovely, the talented, my ex-brother-in-law, and every single time. And I find that, like children, drunk people love repetition, and everybody loves to see a joke coming down the pike. And it's like the catchphrase. Everybody loves a little catchphrase, especially when they can say along. It starts taking on this sort of children's theater for adults quality. So yeah, it just sort of evolved with time. And I think I said it once and I was like, fuck that, I'm going to say it every single time for the rest of my life.
Yeah, well, I love it. I was thinking as you're saying that, you are kind of a penis whisperer of sorts as a host on stage. I feel like you've had more people with dicks flash them at you than I certainly have, and I feel like that needs to change if you're listening right now, listeners. And this podcast, part of the tagline is that it's a full frontal glimpse into burlesque, but you do not allow me, for example, to go full frontal in your Wiggle Room show. And I just wanted to have you live on air now to ask you, why do you feel like censoring my art?
Because junk is yucky. Genitals are disgusting.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I'm gay and I think dick is just the lesser of two evils.
Really?
Someone says, hey, you want to see a dick pic? I'm like, no, I don't. It looks like an alien autopsy. Get that thing away from me.
Oh.
Yeah. And the Wiggle Room is a family show. And
what family?
Yeah.
The Addams Family?
Exactly. So yeah, I just had a certain aesthetic I wanted to go for. And it's nothing personal. It's nothing personal against you or your dick. You're both lovely, but I just there is a little side story. Basically, for many years, the Wiggle Room. Now, mind you, this is the Wiggle Room. This is the show I was producing. So yes. I had my rules. If I'm just hosting a show and people are pulling out their dicks and their pussies and whatever, that's really none of my business. I'm just the host. Have at it. But my show, the Wiggle Room, I had certain preferences. And for many years, the Wiggle Room was an exclusively all-female cast for years and years and years. And so then finally after, because I liked the old school kind of tradition of all women, one male host. I just liked that aesthetic, as problematic as that may be. And then one day we were working together in another show, and I said, screw it, I have to have Chris Harder in my show. He's gonna break the glass ceiling because white men cannot get a break in this country.
Right.
And so you were my premier gentleman guest. And all the women up to that point knew that it was a pussy-free environment.
Uh-huh.
But I failed to tell you, and you did flash your dick to the audience. And the women in the back and backstage were like, oh, I get it. Oh, so the gay host is okay with a dick on stage, but it's a no pussies available. Trust me, they were available. But so yeah, so I did have a chat with you. And so that's been my rule, but it's really just a matter of aesthetics. It's just I like a little bit of an old school aesthetic.
Well, and as an old person, that makes sense for you. So
Yeah,
this is
classic.
maybe a follow-up question. So have you ever stripped before, or did you ever work as a like a go-go dancer, a stripper, anything like that when you were in New York?
I've done ironic stripping years ago. I've done a couple. I did one where I just peeled off a tux with tails, and underneath I had red heart-shaped chest hair sort of glued on. And of
Uh-huh.
course I was a redhead, and I had a armpit hair to match. And then I did do Hotsy Totsy, which is a nerdlesque show, invited me to perform in their Harry Potter show. So I was one of the more obscure warlocks, and I stripped as this Harry Potter character. But that was all shtick. That was all
Uh-huh.
for shits and giggles. But yeah, that's not happening ever again. I mean, yeah, I'm a little long in the tooth to be pulling out Mr. Happy. Well, Mr.
Never.
Happy, no, Mr. Happy never. No, I never went full dick. No, it was pretty wholesome. But yes, I did strip to a degree for laughs.
Okay, okay. Well, one more question on that subject. What to you, because I've asked several performers on this podcast this question. What to you is the sexiest thing a performer can do on stage?
That's a tricky one, Chris Harder, because sexiness is a very elusive thing. I can't just say, oh, when they pull out their dick, or I think because I've watched women performing in a way that sort of made me feel, you know what I mean, like feel a little
Mm-hmm.
tug. It's really just unbridled, flirty, kind of a little animalistic, kind of a little bit of that. Oh, what's her name? Jesus Christ! Come on, brain, you can do it. Anne Margaret,
Sure.
like that quality, just like that fucking. There she is. She's fully clothed, and you're just horny. You know what I mean? That kind of quality, that like, I find that really kind of hot, and that can be in men, women, trans, big, small. That's just that sort of thing, that sexuality that comes out of a person. It's almost like the energy is what makes me what I think is sexy, that inner crazy energy that I personally could never do. I mean, I that's why it's so alien to me. I talk about sex, I joke about sex. My mind is very dirty and sexual and pervy. Like my only skill I've developed is my ability to make a dick joke on the fly. But that whole thing that certain dancers do that I just can't even imagine. Like the only time I achieve that level of is when I'm in full blown fucking. It's the only time I ever behave that way.
Uh-huh.
I'm just too uptight. I'm a New Englander. I'm a wasp from New England. It's not happening.
Well, it does make me think too. It reminds me of what you were saying earlier just about hosting. Like, not like what works for some host is not going to work for the next host. You really have to, I think, in a way, like, I know something that was really hard for me to learn, or took a while to learn, was that I was at my personal best when I was, as cliche as it sounds, just really being myself, or writing the jokes that I thought were funny, or interacting with people in a way that felt authentic to me. And I think the same is true as kind of just a universal principle. Like, the performers who are the most memorable, who make us laugh, who turn us on, who make us cry, do it because they are living truthfully in themselves. And sometimes that's like big and slapsticky, and sometimes it's a very different energy. But, you know, I guess I'm just saying, Bradford, I feel like there's someone sexy just bursting inside you, bursting to get out. And I
They're hidden, but they're hidden away. I hear you. I heard that loud and clear. No, I think you're right. Even as I'm doing like a character, obviously I'm doing like, I have the fake accent, I'm doing the shtick, and I'm talking about things that in my life that never happened, there still is, you have to connect with that audience on a personal level. And it's a relationship with these people. And if you don't have that relationship, it's really hard to keep control over them. I think you have to have that to, I mean, that's part of the way you actually conduct the evening, is having that connection with people. So even in a character, I agree with you. You still need to have a relationship with them, and highs and lows and emotion. And lately, as I get older, I'm better at having those sweet moments, those sweet romantic moments with an audience. It's not just all laughs. There's those little touching moments if they present themselves. I'm not shoehorning those in unless they happen organically, but I am open to those moments as well. So yeah, I agree. You need to, it's a human connection, and live theater is like a dying art. I mean, these people should be rewarded for showing up, even these assholes. I'm like, well, you paid cash to come and see live theater. How much can I hate you, really?
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe I'll try to remember that next time I'm dealing with an unruly audience member.
They need to be educated.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. A few more questions here. Since, on the note of a family-friendly show, you are also the father of two beautiful children, one of whom, actually, no, now I've met both of your kids. And they're truly lovely. There's a lot of burlesque performers with children, and certainly there are plenty of historical burlesque performers who had families. What do you think is a potential benefit for kids whose parents are in this kind of show business?
I just think it's a fun, colorful childhood. My kids get to meet such wonderful, entertaining, fun, animated, interesting people. And I find that burlesque performers, in that they are able to entertain crowds of drunk party goers, are also able to entertain children, because they're basically the same thing. And and also just stage performers, like we were saying, they have to develop a connection. And so all these people they're meeting have this lovely engagement with them, and they're trying to charm them, and they're playful, and then on top of that, there's just so many different kinds of people. They get such a diverse crowd of people coming in and out of their lives, that it's open. They're growing up with open minds, and yeah, it's I think it's a wonderful way to grow up, and they have the fun of a very permissive father. I mean, when my 11-year-old boy is making dirty jokes and I'm laughing, how mad can I be? When I'm swollen with pride that my boy just landed a really funny dick joke. I mean, yeah. I mean, a lot of kids don't get that, and I think it's. That's the thing. When we adopted the kid, just the full thing. I'm a white guy with a white husband and two black children. that we adopted through foster care when they were infants. And I remember when we adopted, I was like, all I really want is to, I just want them to be happy. I want them to do whatever they want to do. But I really would like to laugh with them. I want children I can laugh with. And I'm thrilled to report that both my kids are fucking hilarious. So yeah, we have a lot of laughs around here. So
I think also my dad taught me probably my first dirty joke as well. So Dad, if you're listening to this podcast, you had more of an effect on me than maybe you realized. It's your fault I'm gay. Just kidding. One last question I've been thinking about here, because I mean, I know I'm making fun of you doing this forever, but I think that's also, again, a testament to your talent that you have been doing this for a long time and people love you and want to see you perform and probably are really going to miss you on every Thursday at the Wiggle Room, even though you'll be there on the weekends as well. But what to you is maybe one big difference that you've noticed in, I guess, New York City burlesque from when you first started to where it's at today?
Well, when I started, there was no social media, and there was the people coming to the shows were like really New Yorkers. I mean, Slipper Room was on the same footprint it is now, but it was that one story Slipper. But for people that don't know, originally the Slipper Room was a little one story theater. Since then, it's that structure was raised, and on the same footprint, they have put a 3-story spectacular building on top of that. But back in the day when it was little, you would get all sorts of wackos in there, and you got your tourists, but the tourists were in our world, as opposed to dominating the world, which they do now. It's a tourist attraction, which is great. I'm not knocking that. I like that. But back in the day, it was like the audiences were freaks, and I think the shows were freakier. That sort of Lower East Side, late 90s, early 2000s, artsy fartsy, fucking like glittery beards and rosewood throwing fecal matter at the audience, and just I could really push the envelope with the humor, with absolutely no danger of it being posted anywhere. And it was artsy and scrappy and batty and fun. Now I think it's changed a lot. I think it's a little more polished, and I think Slipper Room is good at pushing the envelope still. But I know my shtick has definitely evolved with the times, or devolved. I don't know. But yeah, it's been quite a journey over the years, rewriting my jokes to fit the zeitgeist. But it keeps you on your toes, and but yeah, it's very, very different now. The whole culture is completely different, and you can't just do all this nutty, crazy debauchery in a bubble. You have to consider a lot more.
Yeah, well, I do think social media has changed a lot of that. I also think too, just the form of burlesque itself is it's like so elusive. I mean, we say it's the strip and the tease, or it's this or that, or it's, people taking off their clothes in a gritty Lower East Side club. But like it constantly shifts and adapts and reinvents itself. And I think it forces all performers to all of us to be on our toes constantly, because something that worked even last week is not necessarily going to work this week. And I don't know, maybe that's a way of like coming back around to the need for people to just live in the moment more, especially if you're hosting, but also just for performers as well. That those moments of genuine connection, like they don't happen if you are just on autopilot.
Yeah.
Even though I say a lot of the same jokes, but I say them differently.
Yeah, they can. It's weird because I'll do the same if I'm not feeling it, and I'll just sort of muddy my way through a monologue that I've done before, and the inflections are all in place, and I'm hitting the punchlines in a certain rhythm that's always been reliable. But they can sense it. The audience even if they don't know they can sense it, it's almost like a bunch of barn animals when a hurricane is about to hit. It's like something's off. They can sense that something's not quite there, even though you're presenting in a certain way. It's a little deeper than that. It's really, you have to force yourself to engage if you're not feeling it. I mean, that's your job. So,
well, Bradford Scobie, where can people find you? And is there anything that you want to plug coming up?
Well, is there anything I want to plug coming up? I would prefer to be plugged, actually.
100% right there with you.
So that's why we're not compatible. Anyway, let's see. So I still live at the Slipper Room. I am going to be hosting the Dallas Fetish Ball, which is all very exciting. That's in November. And I'm in Melody Sweets' Sweet Spot, which is her cooking show, which is a batshit crazy, like Pee-wee's Playhouse kind of cooking show, in which I play Dr. Donut, who he is the supervillain. That was produced by the Absinthe people, and it's online. It's really fun. I highly recommend that. It's like 6 episodes, I think.
Okay, great. And I'll also tag your Instagram profiles as well for people.
Yes, please. Also, check out the Big Shebang. The Big Shebang at let's see, the Burlesque Galaxy. The Big Shebang it's a 4-part mini series. It's a sci-fi burlesque sitcom that you can watch on Burlesque Galaxy, the website, and it stars Sir Richard Castle as the captain commander of the Starship Booby Prize, and he travels through a galaxy of burlesque and other intergalactic things.
Cool. Oh, I can't wait. I know it's been out for a while. I need to sit down and watch it.
Yeah, that was a COVID thing. We came up with that in quarantine. It's quite the little gem. I'm proud of that.
Yeah, it's shot beautifully. The stills look amazing.
And I look gorgeous.
And you
absolutely
look gorgeous.
Yes.
Years younger.
Yeah, my pores are perfectly lit. No, anyway.
Well, Bradford, it truly is such a pleasure for me to have you on the podcast. And I know I said this before to you. I was nervous to have you on because you've been so complimentary and supportive. And I was worried about fucking it up. But you know what I said? I said, God damn it, Chris Harder. You have to go into this interview. You have to let it go. You have to be present. And you're still probably going to fuck things up. So,
and you did.
And I did. And I did.
This was an absolute disaster.
Yes. But truly, thank you so much. I love you. I get so much inspiration from you, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
I love you too. I get inspiration from you as well, both as a burlesque performer and a host. And if you have not seen Chris Harder on stage, either as a burlesque performer or as a host, you are missing out. The man is a gorgeous, twinkly vision and fucking hysterical. And yes, a force to be reckoned with.
Well, thank you. And I have all my natural body hair too. So there's
Yeah, I hear that.
Okay, everyone, thank you again for listening to another episode of Showboys. And if you want to keep things extra glittery and gritty, you can rate this podcast with a full frontal review. And no, that's not a request for dick pics, at least not officially. And if you have rated and reviewed Showboys, thank you so much. Tune in next week. And until then, bye-bye. Bradford, you want to say bye?
My stage name is Dick Pick. No, anyway, bye.
Thank you for listening to Showboys. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you didn't like it,
you are a whore, darling.